Marcus Wellington adjusted his fitted blazer as he stood in line at the Daily Grind, his favorite coffee shop in downtown Chicago. At 34, he'd worked tirelessly to become one of the city's most respected civil rights attorneys, though today he was dressed casually, jeans and a simple shirt, enjoying a rare day off before a major trial. "One large Americano, please," Marcus said with a warm smile. As he waited for his order, he noticed the man beside him, a tall, sharp-dressed white man in an expensive suit, probably in his late 40s, with slicked back hair and an air of superiority that seemed to radiate from him. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely, reaching past the man to grab a napkin from the counter. The man, whose name was Richard Thornhill, stepped back dramatically, as if Marcus had invaded his personal space. "Watch it," Richard snapped, his voice dripping with disdain. "Some people have no manners." Marcus raised an eyebrow but said nothing, choosing to ignore the comment. He'd encountered this kind of attitude before, and he'd learned that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially not before his morning coffee. "Marcus, your Americano," the barista called out. As Marcus reached for his coffee, Richard suddenly cut directly in front of him, nearly knocking the cup from Marcus's hand. Hot coffee splashed onto Marcus's shirt. "Hey!" Marcus exclaimed, looking down at the growing stain. Richard didn't apologize. Instead, he looked Marcus up and down with undisguised contempt. "Maybe you should be more careful. Although, I suppose that's asking too much from someone like you." The emphasis on someone like you hung in the air like poison. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Someone like me?" Richard smirked, grabbing his own coffee from the counter. "Don't play dumb. People like you are always looking for a handout, always claiming you're victims. Maybe if your people spent less time complaining and more time working hard, you wouldn't be standing here in ratty clothes in the middle of a workday." The coffee shop went quiet. Other customers were now watching, some with their phones out, recording. Marcus took a deep breath, his legal mind already cataloging the discrimination he was witnessing. But he remained calm. "Sir, you don't know anything about me or what I do." "Oh, I know enough," Richard continued, emboldened by his own prejudice. "I'm an attorney, and I see people like you in court all the time. Always crying racism when really, you just can't take responsibility for your own failures. This country gave you every opportunity, and you still can't make something of yourselves." "That's enough," the barista interjected. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Richard scoffed. "I'm a paying customer. I have every right to be here." He turned back to Marcus. "You know what? Sue me." "Oh wait, you probably can't even afford a lawyer." He laughed at his own cruel joke. Marcus pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card, holding it out to Richard with steady hands. "Actually, I am a lawyer. Marcus Wellington, civil rights attorney. But I'm off the clock today, so I'll let this go. However, sir, you might want to reconsider how you treat people. The world is smaller than you think." Richard glanced at the card and laughed mockingly. "Civil rights attorney? Of course you are. Probably got your degree through affirmative action." "I graduated top of my class at Harvard Law." He flicked Marcus's card onto the floor dismissively. "Real lawyers earn their place. We'll never meet in a courtroom because you and I exist in completely different leagues." With that, Richard grabbed his coffee and walked out, leaving Marcus standing there, shirt stained, dignity intact, but anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. The barista rushed over with napkins. "I'm so sorry, sir. Your next coffee is on the house." That man was absolutely horrible. Marcus smiled gratefully, though his mind was already elsewhere. "Thank you. It's not your fault. Some people carry hate like it's a badge of honor." As he cleaned himself up, Marcus couldn't shake the encounter. Richard Thornhill. The name was vaguely familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. Little did either man know, fate was about to bring them face to face again, much sooner than Richard could have ever imagined. The next morning, Marcus arrived at his law firm, Wellington and Associates, by 6 a.m. The office building stood tall in Chicago's legal district, glass and steel reflecting the early morning sun. His firm, which he'd built from nothing over the past 8 years, had become a beacon for those seeking justice against discrimination and civil rights violations. His paralegal, Jenny Chen, was already at her desk, surrounded by case files. "Morning, Marcus. Ready for the big day?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, loosening his tie slightly. "Where are we with the Henderson case?" The Henderson case was massive, a class action lawsuit against Thornhill, Patterson and Associates, one of Chicago's oldest and most prestigious corporate law firms. The case alleged systemic racial discrimination in their hiring and promotion practices. Over 70 Black and Latino employees and former employees were part of the lawsuit, claiming they'd been passed over for promotions, paid less than their white counterparts, and subjected to a hostile work environment. Marcus had been preparing for this case for over a year. The trial was set to begin today. "All the witnesses are confirmed," Jenny said, handing him a folder. "And you're not going to believe this, we just got confirmation on their lead attorney." "Who is it?" Jenny's expression was somewhere between amusement and concern. "Richard Thornhill himself." Marcus froze. "Richard Thornhill? As in the senior partner?" "The very same." Apparently, he's defending the firm personally. I guess when your own company is accused of discrimination, you don't trust anyone else to handle it. Marcus's mind flashed back to the coffee shop encounter. The pompous attorney who'd insulted him, mocked his profession, and degraded him based solely on the color of his skin. That Richard Thornhill. A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. Well, this just got interesting. The Cook County Courthouse was an imposing building, all marble columns and legal gravitas. Marcus walked through the metal detectors with his team, Jenny, his associate attorney David Okonkwo, and several paralegals carrying boxes of evidence. In the hallway outside Courtroom 4B, Marcus spotted them, the defense team from Thornhill, Patterson and Associates. There were at least 8 attorneys, all in expensive suits, surrounding their lead counsel, Richard Thornhill. Richard was holding court, literally, surrounded by his team and speaking loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. This case is frivolous. These people want a payout because they weren't good enough to advance. That's not discrimination, that's meritocracy. Then Richard looked up and saw Marcus. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, Marcus saw recognition flash across Richard's face, followed immediately by shock, then something that might have been fear, before his expression settled back into arrogant disdain. Marcus walked directly toward him, hand extended professionally. Mr. Thornhill. I'm Marcus Wellington, lead attorney for the plaintiffs. I believe we'll be facing each other today. Richard's face had gone slightly pale, but he recovered quickly, refusing to shake Marcus's hand. Yes, I remember you from somewhere. The coffee shop yesterday, Marcus said calmly, his voice even. You spilled coffee on me. You also suggested I probably couldn't afford a lawyer and that we'd never meet in a courtroom because we exist in completely different leagues. How ironic. The attorneys around Richard shifted uncomfortably. Several looked embarrassed. Richard's jaw clenched. That was. I didn't realize that I was the attorney opposing you in the biggest case of your firm's history. Marcus finished. No, I suppose you didn't. You were too busy making assumptions based on how I looked. This is highly unprofessional, Richard blustered. I'll be filing a complaint about your conduct. Marcus smiled pleasantly. My conduct? Mr. Thornhill, there are multiple witnesses and video footage of your conduct yesterday. In fact, I've already provided copies to the court as evidence of your character and your firm's culture of discrimination. But we can discuss all of that inside. All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison presiding. Judge Morrison was a veteran jurist, a black woman in her 60s known for her no-nonsense approach and commitment to justice. She'd been on the bench for 25 years and had seen it all. Please be seated, she said, surveying both legal teams. We're here today to begin trial in the matter of Henderson et al. Versus Thornhill, Patterson and Associates. Counsel, are you ready to proceed? Yes, Your Honor, Marcus said, rising. Yes, Your Honor, Richard echoed, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Very well. Mr. Wellington, your opening statement. Marcus stood and approached the jury, 12 citizens of varying backgrounds, carefully selected to be fair and impartial. He'd memorized his opening statement, but he didn't need notes. This case lived in his heart. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the next few weeks, you're going to hear a story. It's a story that, unfortunately, is all too common in corporate America. It's a story about talented, hardworking people who did everything right, who got the degrees, passed the bar, worked long hours, brought in clients, won cases, and yet, despite all of that, found themselves hitting a ceiling they couldn't break through. Not because they weren't good enough, but because of the color of their skin. The defendants, Thornhill, Patterson and Associates, want you to believe this case is about disgruntled employees who couldn't cut it. But the evidence will show something very different. We will present statistical data showing that Black and Latino attorneys at this firm were promoted at a rate 70% lower than their white counterparts, despite having equal or better performance reviews. We will show you emails with racial slurs, jokes about diversity hires, and memos explicitly discussing the need to maintain the firm's traditional image, which, as you'll discover, was code for keeping the firm predominantly white. We will introduce you to people like Dr. James Henderson, a Harvard Law graduate. Marcus glanced meaningfully at Richard, who was passed over for partner 5 times despite bringing in more revenue than any associate in the firm's history. We'll introduce you to Maria Gonzalez, who was told she should act less ethnic if she wanted to advance. And we'll introduce you to dozens of others with similar stories. Most importantly, we will show you that this discrimination came from the top. The culture of exclusion was created, maintained, and celebrated by the firm's senior partners, particularly its managing partner, Mr. Richard Thornhill himself. Yesterday, Mr. Thornhill saw me in a coffee shop. He didn't know I was an attorney. He saw a black man in casual clothes, and he made assumptions. He insulted me, degraded me, and suggested that people like me, and I quote, are always looking for a handout and can't take responsibility for our own failures. This wasn't just a bad day or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was who Richard Thornhill is. And this is the culture he created at his firm. By the end of this trial, you will have no doubt that Thornhill, Patterson and Associates engaged in systematic, intentional racial discrimination. And you will have the power to hold them accountable. Thank you. Marcus sat down. He could feel the energy in the room. Several jurors were nodding. Others looked angry. He'd connected with them. Richard stood for his opening statement, but Marcus could see his opponent was rattled. The coffee shop incident had undermined Richard's credibility before he'd even spoken. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, Richard began, his voice forceful but defensive. What Mr. Wellington described sounds terrible. But it's fiction. It's a narrative carefully constructed to tug at your heartstrings and extract money from a successful business. The truth is far simpler. Thornhill, Patterson and Associates is a meritocracy. We promote the best lawyers regardless of race. The plaintiffs in this case simply weren't the best. Yes, I had an unfortunate encounter with Mr. Wellington yesterday. I was stressed, I was having a bad day, and I said things I shouldn't have. I apologize for that. But one bad moment doesn't make me, or my firm, racist. It makes me human. The statistics Mr. Wellington will show you lack context. The emails you'll see were taken out of context. This case is nothing more than an attempt to weaponize political correctness for financial gain. We ask that you look at the facts objectively and recognize this lawsuit for what it is, a shakedown. Thank you. Richard sat down, but Marcus could see the jury wasn't buying it. The bad day excuse rang hollow. One juror, a middle-aged black woman, actually shook her head. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus systematically dismantled Thornhill, Patterson and Associates' defenses. He called witness after witness, talented attorneys who'd been marginalized, demeaned, and discriminated against. Dr. James Henderson took the stand first, dignified in his suit despite the humiliation of recounting years of rejection. Dr. Henderson, Marcus asked, how many times were you passed over for partner? 5 times. And in those 5 years, what was your performance like? I had the highest billable hours in the firm for 3 consecutive years. I brought in 12 major corporate clients. My win rate in court was 92%. And during this time, were white associates with less experience and lower performance promoted to partner? Yes. 7 of them. During cross-examination, Richard tried to imply that Henderson had interpersonal issues. Isn't it true, Dr. Henderson, that several partners found you difficult to work with? Yes, that's what they said. So perhaps that's why you weren't promoted, not your race, but your attitude? Henderson's voice was calm but firm. Mr. Thornhill, I was called difficult to work with because I objected when a senior partner called me boy in a meeting. I was called difficult when I reported that a client had used a racial slur in my presence and the firm did nothing. If standing up against discrimination makes me difficult, then I suppose I'm guilty. The jury was visibly moved. Marcus then introduced Maria Gonzalez, a brilliant corporate attorney who'd been told to tone down her accent and stop speaking Spanish with clients, even though she built the firm's entire Latin American business portfolio. The emails Marcus presented were devastating. One from Richard himself read, "We need to be careful about the optics of too many diversity hires. Clients expect a certain look from their attorneys." Another email thread discussed a black associate who'd applied for a position, qualified on paper, but not the right cultural fit. You know what I mean. Richard objected repeatedly, claiming the emails were taken out of context, but Judge Morrison overruled him each time. The trial's pivotal moment came when Marcus called his surprise witness, Bethany Thornhill, Richard's own daughter. Richard's face went white when he saw her walk into the courtroom. Bethany was a young attorney herself, 28 years old, who'd briefly worked at her father's firm before leaving in disgust. Marcus had tracked her down during discovery, and she'd agreed to testify after much soul-searching. Miss Thornhill, Marcus began gently, you worked at your father's firm for 2 years after graduating from Columbia Law School. Can you describe the environment there? Bethany's voice shook, but she spoke clearly. It was toxic. I watched talented attorneys of color be ignored, marginalized, and driven out. I watched my father and the other senior partners make jokes about diversity quotas and complain about how they had to lower standards to meet hiring goals. Did you ever discuss this with your father? Yes. Multiple times. He told me I was being too sensitive and that I didn't understand how the legal world worked. He said that people of color needed to prove themselves more because clients were naturally skeptical of their abilities. Richard stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is my daughter. She's been estranged from me for years. She's clearly biased. Sit down, Mr. Thornhill, Judge Morrison said sharply. You'll have your chance to cross-examine. Marcus continued. Ms. Thornhill, why did you leave the firm? Bethany's eyes filled with tears. I left because I couldn't be part of what it represented anymore. I became a lawyer to fight for justice, not to perpetuate injustice. And I couldn't look at myself in the mirror knowing I was benefiting from a system that kept others down because of their race. She looked directly at her father. Dad, I love you. But what you've done, what that firm has done, is wrong. And it needs to stop. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of a juror quietly crying. Richard's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. How do you discredit your own daughter? After 3 weeks of testimony, both sides gave their closing arguments. Marcus spoke passionately but without theatrics. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the evidence. You've seen the emails. You've heard from witnesses who lived through this discrimination. You've heard from Bethany Thornhill, who had the courage to tell the truth even though it meant standing against her own father. This isn't about political correctness. It's not about a shakedown. It's about basic human dignity and equal opportunity under the law. Thornhill, Patterson and Associates violated federal civil rights laws. They created a hostile work environment. And they did it systematically, deliberately, and unapologetically. You have the power to send a message. A message that this behavior will not be tolerated. That all people, regardless of race, deserve to be judged on their merits, not the color of their skin. I trust you'll do the right thing. Thank you. Richard's closing was defensive, desperate. He repeated his claims about meritocracy, about context, about misunderstanding. But his heart wasn't in it. The evidence had been overwhelming. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman, the middle-aged black woman who'd shaken her head during opening statements, stood to read the verdict. In the matter of Henderson et al. Versus Thornhill, Patterson and Associates, on the count of racial discrimination in violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, we find for the plaintiffs. On the count of creating a hostile work environment, we find for the plaintiffs. On the count of retaliation against employees who reported discrimination, we find for the plaintiffs. The courtroom erupted in cheers and tears. Marcus embraced Dr. Henderson and Maria Gonzalez. Years of pain and frustration were being acknowledged, validated. Furthermore, the forewoman continued, we award compensatory damages in the amount of $12 million, and punitive damages in the amount of $35 million. Richard sat motionless, his entire world crumbling around him. After the verdict, Marcus stood on the courthouse steps surrounded by his clients and the press. Camera flashes lit up the afternoon sky. Mr. Wellington, what do you say to people who claim this was just about money? A reporter called out. Marcus adjusted the microphone. This was never about money. This was about accountability. This was about saying that in America, you don't get to discriminate against people because of their race, no matter how powerful you are, no matter how prestigious your firm is. Today, 70 brave individuals stood up and said enough. And a jury of 12 citizens agreed with them. That's justice. Do you have anything to say to Richard Thornhill? Marcus paused, thinking back to the coffee shop. I'd say what I wished I'd said more forcefully that day. When you judge people by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character, you don't just harm them, you harm yourself. You limit your own humanity. You miss out on brilliant colleagues, meaningful relationships, and the chance to be part of something bigger than your prejudice. I hope Mr. Thornhill learns from this. I hope he becomes better. Inside the courthouse, Richard was packing his briefcase when he saw Bethany approaching. Dad, she said softly. Don't, Richard said, his voice broken. Just don't. Dad, I still love you. But I can't support what you did. I hope someday you'll understand that. Richard looked at his daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. I lost everything today. The case, the firm, my reputation. And I lost you a long time ago. You don't have to stay lost, Bethany said. You can change. But you have to want to. She turned and walked away, leaving Richard alone with the weight of his choices. 6 months after the verdict, Marcus was in his office when he received an unexpected visitor. Mr. Wellington? There's a Richard Thornhill here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. Marcus's first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity won out. Send him in. Richard entered, and Marcus barely recognized him. The arrogance was gone. He looked older, humbler, smaller somehow. Mr. Wellington, thank you for seeing me. I know I have no right to your time. What do you want, Mr. Thornhill? Richard sat down, uninvited. I want to apologize. Not the lawyer apology I gave in court, the real one. What I said to you in that coffee shop, the things I did at my firm, the way I treated people, it was wrong. Inexcusable. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying the man. What changed? Everything. The firm was dissolved. Most of my partners blamed me and won't speak to me. My wife left me. And Bethany, my daughter, told me she was ashamed of me. That was the worst part. Richard's voice cracked. I've spent 6 months in therapy, really examining who I am and why I became this person. I don't have excuses. I had advantages my whole life, and instead of using them to help others, I used them to keep people down. I'm ashamed. Why are you telling me this? Because I owe you the truth. And because. Richard pulled out a check. This is a personal check for $1 million. I want you to use it to fund scholarships for minority law students. It's not enough, it can never be enough, but it's a start. Marcus looked at the check, then at Richard. This doesn't undo the harm you caused. I know. Nothing can undo it. But maybe it can help prevent the next Richard Thornhill from existing. Maybe some kid who would have been denied opportunities because of their race will get a chance instead. He stood to leave. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you changed my life that day in court. You held up a mirror, and I finally saw myself clearly. I didn't like what I saw. So I'm trying to become someone different. Someone better. After Richard left, Marcus sat with the check in his hand. Jenny came in. Was that who I think it was? Yeah. What did he want? Marcus showed her the check. He wants to fund scholarships. He's trying to change. Do you believe him? Marcus thought about it. I don't know. But I believe people can change if they're willing to do the work. And even if his motives are selfish, trying to ease his guilt, the result is the same. Kids who need help will get it. So you'll accept it? I'll accept it. And I'll name it the Bethany Thornhill Scholarship Fund, after the woman who had the courage to tell the truth. Marcus looked out his office window at the Chicago skyline. He thought about the coffee shop, the trial, and the long road to justice. He thought about all the people who'd trusted him to fight for them, and he thought about how the arc of the moral universe, as Dr. King said, is long, but it bends toward justice. Sometimes it just needs a little help bending. This story explores themes of prejudice, accountability, and redemption. While Marcus achieved justice through the legal system, the real victory was in standing firm against discrimination with dignity and forcing others to confront their biases. Richard's journey, from arrogant bigot to someone seeking redemption, shows that while change is possible, it requires genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing and sustained effort to become better.